Welcome to the No Quit Living podcast. Our primary objective is to motivate and inspire our listeners to never quit. The reality of life is simple. We all fall. We all fail. At times, we get knocked down. The question is, do we get back up? Are we stronger? Are we better prepared to attain the maximum of our potential? Thank you for joining our No Quit tribe. As you go for your greatness today, never quit. And remember, we rise by lifting others up. Welcome to episode number 351 of the No Quit Living podcast. I'm your host, Christopher J. Worth, and today's theme of the day is Day 1. Our quote of the day comes to us from Do Xantamata. Every day is day 1. Each day you choose what to start, what to end, and what to continue. My question for you is, what are you doing on Saturday, May 14th? If you are looking to take both your personal and professional life to the next level, we would love it if you would join us in Eastchester, New York for this live interactive workshop. Shoot me an email at chris@noquitliving.com for information and tickets. I'm excited to speak with our guest today. As you know, I'm an avid reader, and I'm always asking people for book recommendations. I was introduced to the book, This is Day 1, by one of the athletic directors I work with down in Virginia. When I finished reading it, I made sure to get Drew Dudley on our podcast. I hope you enjoy today's episode. Drew, I'd like to welcome you to the No Quit Living podcast.
Oh, my friend, I'm thrilled to be here.
We had an awesome conversation post-interview. So first question I have for you is the same one I ask everybody is, are you ready to positively impact at least one person today?
Hey, if I don't, what's the point of getting up, right?
I could not agree more. And I think during this pandemic, I think it's refocused a lot of people's, I guess, mission and message of just really doing things for other people, which is obviously one of the things that we believe in. But wanted to ask you if you have either a no-quit story or perhaps a really challenging time personally or professionally where you could have given up or given in, but you didn't.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the challenges for me is that what I talk about is trying to find opportunities to create these powerful moments of interpersonal impact. So redefining leadership as being these individual moments, whether it's a moment of forgiveness or empowerment or gratitude or the stuff that I think all too often gets called the little things, which has always driven me nuts because we call the most powerful stuff we do the little things, kindness, compassion, forgiveness, because they aren't necessarily tied to titles and power. But the idea they're not tied to power, I think, means they're not tied to what we consider positions of power. But the ability to impact how somebody feels in a given moment, for better or for worse, kind of is the most powerful thing that we've got, right? And it's also, I guess, the only source of power on earth that doesn't have systemic barriers between that power and most of the people on earth. Like almost every source of power on the planet isn't accessible to almost everyone on the planet. But this ability to create these positive moments of interpersonal impact, everybody's got that. That is a universally shared power. And, I don't want to come out being particularly dark, although I guess the question lends you to it, is that I had a point in my life in 2015 where for the first time ever, I felt like the holy trinity of happiness, relationships, physical health, and business health were finally all together. And the thing about it being sort of a three pillars is because often one of them is wavering a little bit and then the other two pick up the slack, right? But every now and then in your life, you're lucky enough to have all three just finally come together. And on January 17th of 2017, the only woman I've ever loved died by suicide. And one of the things, it's weird, right? Because you hear a lot about love growing up. You got music, you got songs, you got whatever. But what got me is I kind of had always been led to believe it was like this powerful, extraordinary, like mind-bending passion that was love. And what I found is that actually what love is fascination. Like if you're in love when you're absolutely fascinated by another human being, like the good, the bad, the up, the down. And I realized that I think you're in love. It's not in one of these like really cool moments where it all becomes clear. But for me, I think one day you wake up and you realize that you can't perceive of a version of the future that they're not in. And like every version of the future you have, you don't even know when it happened, but you no longer have like an edition where they are not featured prominently. It just happens to you one day. And so I did not have a version of my future that did not include Anastasia. And then all of a sudden on this morning, it gets all blown up and I no longer have a concept of the future. And I wasn't entirely sure I wanted one because it meant sacrificing every version I had had. I'd given up on all versions without. And so I've got a job that calls for me to go out and say that within this world, there is always an opportunity for good. And then for me, the symbol of everything that was the best was now gone, and was gone because of a violent sexual assault and, you know, the darkest of humanity. And also we're living in a world at the time where that was becoming, you know, more, it seemed to be more and more accepted for people to talk that way or to forgive that. You know, very high profile people in the world were getting away with it or almost proud of it. And so to be able to look at what I wanted to do, which was to decide whether I wanted to go out there and tell people that the world was a fundamentally decent place where we could all create good things, when I at the time felt like I was staring at evidence that there was no good in the world, was probably the moment where I really had to look and say, can I get up and do what I love? Because do I even believe it anymore? It wasn't that I was mad. It wasn't that I was trying to take stuff out on the world. I just honestly had to sit back and be like, for the better part of a decade, I have passionately believed in something. And then I was so lucky to get to share it with people. And was it all not true? So not only do I want to go back to doing it, but do I want to look back and be like, man, was I wrong? And that to me, and everything that's come since then, you know, when I looked at what you wanted to talk about on your podcast, everything since then has been the example of, I think, what you talk about is it's just been a constant exploration and reinvention and argument with myself about what's the right thing to do next. Is the world a good place? Are you adding to it? Are you naive? Like, what is my not quit story? It's every single day getting up and asking myself, are you an idiot? Is this true? Is anyone listening? And really, does your form of leadership and this talk of individual moments of positivity, does it have any place in a world right now? Or is it better to pick a side and fight? Because sometimes it feels like, it's like, you know what? There is no more interest in finding common ground and trying to have a positive impact. It is about winning. And one of the things I talk about is that leaders elevate situations, they don't escalate them. And elevate means trying to succeed, and escalate means trying to win. And one of the big things that stands in the way of success is our need to win. And when you write a book, and you know this, and maybe I'm wrong, man, I don't want to give really long answers, I know, but someone asked me once, what's the big thing you learned from writing a book? And one of them was, as soon as you write a book, there are 3 things that you wish you had included in the book and 3 things that you wish you had not. And one of them for me that I still fight with is this elevate versus escalate, because the question is, are there things worth fighting for? And when you fight for things you believe in, are you escalating when instead you should be trying to succeed? Because there are things out in this world you look at and you're like, we shouldn't be trying to find middle ground. That's just wrong. And so, man, you know what my not quit story is that every day seeking that time where for this brief period in my life, everything was made sense and there weren't as many questions. And since I lost her, and I know lots of people are dealing with stuff like this, and the pandemic is doing the same for us, and the disintegration of political discourse is doing this to us, is, wow, what is right now? What is the right thing to do? What is the right way to feel? And every single day for me, that's my not quit. Is it used to be so simple, and I understood. There were good days and there were bad days, but I understood what was right and what I was trying to do. And now I honestly, every day, question constantly. Can I keep doing this? Should I keep doing this? And then some days you're like, yes. And other days you think I can't. And so, man, it's been every day since then, since the world blew up back then, that I've been trying to figure out how to be a good man or be a good person, while also questioning whether or not everything that I use to try to decide or try to be a good person, whether I was right the whole time. And that's hard. And I think there's so much confusion now. And that's weird, man. At 39 years of age is when I started getting super confused. Puberty was a snap compared to getting through the last four or 5 years. I promise my answers will be shorter after that.
No, I think you touched on some incredible things, and I really appreciate that. And I think to just follow up with one thing that really hit me, and not knowing obviously exactly where you were gonna go with that, but I think during this pandemic, and not just dealing with what you dealt with back in 2017 through now, but I think we're in a world where everything is blown up, meaning in a bigger, quicker, faster way with social media. And I think you're right along with myself and so many other people, and probably many of our listeners, of questioning, am I doing the right thing? Is this the right thing? Do I still believe? And I would just like to, encourage our listeners that during these challenging times, if you believe in something or somebody, it's especially during these times that you have to, stay strong to those things. Because I think it's so easy to fall prey to, well, if Drew's doing this and he's saying that, should I change my opinion? But wanted to change lanes for a second. And I purposely didn't share this with you, but I was actually down in Virginia the end of August doing some work with some schools down there. And I'm a huge reader myself. And the athletic director and I became pretty good friends since then and prior to that. But I was in his office getting ready for a speaking event that night. And we were just sitting talking and going over some things. And he had a big bookshelf. And obviously I looked at his bookshelf and I said to him, or I asked him, just like I ask everybody, I said, is there one book that you would recommend that really stood out to you? And full and fair disclosure, prior to that, I had not heard of your book, This Is Day One. Not only did I immediately buy it on Amazon, it was back at my office when I got home. But my point is, it really stood out. But the value of asking people for recommendations, and, is there something that really stood out to you, or is there one book? So kudos to you, because unbeknownst to you, obviously, a gentleman who's an athletic director down in Virginia shared with me that the most important book, or the one book on his shelf of, I think, 6 or 7 different actual shelves. So wanted to ask if you wouldn't mind just briefly touching on This Is Day One and the concept of why you did it, because I was fascinated by it, which is why we're having this conversation now.
Yeah, I mean, the big thing for Day One is the concept of This Is Day One comes from so many different concepts for me, but really what it's about is consistency. Like, leadership isn't in the big stuff, it's in the consistent stuff. And especially any athletes that are listening, it's that get 1% better type of idea, is that it's doing things again and again. But what it was is that the theory of leadership that I used to teach at the university met my own personal experiences. And the idea that leadership often is evaluated over big blocks of time, which means that we sort of assess it based on what we achieve and what we acquire over these blocks of time, whether it's a semester at university, a year, a 5-year plan, a lifetime. But that makes a lot of people who don't feel like they've achieved enough say, well, leadership isn't for me. A big part of it comes from anybody who's ever dealt with addiction. I'm a recovering alcoholic. And the idea that, okay, if you don't want to have a drink for the rest of your life, you got to choose not to have a drink today. And then treat every day of the rest of your life as if it is your first day of recovery. Because on day one, there is an inherent commitment, humility, and forgiveness. Like, the first day of any mission, you're so committed to it. You're so humble because there's so much to do. And there's forgiveness. So when you screw up, you can recommit. But the idea of focusing only on non-negotiable behaviors in a given day means that 2 things can't factor in positively or negatively. One, you can't rest on the laurels of what you've accomplished in the past. All right. Doesn't matter how many days you went to practice. Doesn't matter how many days you haven't had a drink. It doesn't matter how many days you've created a powerful moment. It matters if you do it today. But it also means that you don't get overwhelmed by how much there is still to do. I fight an addiction. This is just one example. This is a big part of my thought process for everything. I fight an addiction. It's very hard. Every single day, it's a battle. I hope to have thousands of more days in my life. The thought of having that fight 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 times is enough to make you not want to start it, right? But if you don't focus on that, if you say these are the non-negotiable behaviors that have to happen today and stay committed to that, what happens is that generates a consistency that means your 100th day one, your 1,000th day one, your 5,000th day one will always be more than your first day one. But what takes you there is the fact that certain things on every day, no matter how different the day is, there are certain consistent things. So there's no one day in anything, in your leadership, in your mental health, in your physical health, in your relationships, in your careers. There's no one day that doesn't start with the day one. And that's when you say, these are the things that have to happen every day. Where I want to get to is the byproduct of consistently doing this. So let's not worry if I did it yesterday, and let's not get freaked out by whether I have to do it tomorrow and 50 more days. Let's only worry about today. And for me, that means that your leadership is by saying, here's the values I stand for. Here's what those values mean. And let's make sure I can prove to myself, not to other people, but to myself, that if I say I'm a person of impact, I'm a person of courage, I'm a person of self-respect, let's actually be able to prove at the end of the day to myself, here is when I was those things. The idea being that, honestly, there's going to be a lot of days where everything in your life that you're not in control of blows up in your face. And it's really important that you create a practice that means that every one of on those days where everything outside of your control blows up, you're able to go at the end of the day and say, yeah, but in these 3 moments, I was the person I wanted to be. And let's face it, man, like there are a lot of days where that's all we get. Like we just get those 2 moments where you were a person of integrity, you were a person of courage, because everything else went to crap. But you can at least say, but in this moment, I was someone I was proud of. After Anastasia died, I didn't know what the future held. And so I started to rely on this idea that if I can consistently give myself evidence that I'm a good person, I don't know what the future holds, but I do know that once I get there, at least I'll still be proud of the man that I am. And that was it, because when we don't know what the future holds, we often won't act in the present because we're afraid of screwing up the future. So I try to create a roadmap for myself of, I don't know what I'm supposed to do for the next month of my life, the next year of my life. So all I have is what I'm supposed to do today. And I know that I can't have a drink between getting up in the morning and going to sleep. Well, then why don't I add a couple more things that I also have to do before I get up and go to bed? And if those are the only things that I do because everything else is unclear, okay, cool. And that's what I try to get people to say is I'm like, if your leadership is in your moment of impact, if your leadership's in your moment of courage, if your leaderships are in your moment of self-respect, then here's a process you can use to live them. And so all those days where you feel like you're treading water, maybe your momentum doesn't feel like it's going, but at least your character is growing every single day, even if you don't feel like your career is or your physical health is or whatever it is. At least you feel like your character is always developing.
You touched on some really important pieces, and I think to break it down, just one of the words I believe you said probably 4 or 5 different times is consistency. And I think going back to my comment earlier, in this day and age of social media and everything being blown up, I think what I love about your work, and not in any way simplifying it, but I think what really stood out to me, obviously why we're having this conversation today, is you've had monumental impact on companies, individuals, but you break it down into the consistency of those small moments. And I think going back to one of the first things you mentioned right at the beginning of our podcast is, I think in today's day and age, we bypass the value and the power within those small moments, only looking at that big moment down the road, whether it's weeks, months, years down the road. And going back to the concept of sports and things, I think if it wasn't for those small things consistently along the way, no team, no company, no individual is going to be successful. But back to the point too of your 100th or 1,000th day one, I love that concept. And I think we all get, I don't know if it's fascinated or too fascinated with the idea of, I have to do this for 50 days, 100 days, to your point. And I appreciate your candor of being, never wanting to have a drink again. You talk about the first day, today's day one, and then tomorrow's the second day one. So I love that. And I have to recommend to our listeners, if you have not read Drew's book, This is Day One, definitely grab a copy of it. But I love the bottom part of the subtitle, which is a practical guide to leadership that matters. And I think that's something that stands out to me. And I know it's a difficult question, but if you can maybe sum up in a short answer the whole concept behind lollipop moments and why those moments are so important for not just ourselves, but for everybody.
Yeah, a lollipop moment became sort of a verbal or intellectual shorthand for a moment of interpersonal impact. And I attach it to a story as a young guy who had been taught that we're supposed to outperform one another and that to be impressive, you sort of have to look like you're the best. And so I'd always tried to accumulate letters after my name and awards and be the president or whatever. And a young woman came up to me and told me that the first time she ever met me was a day she was about to quit university on her very first day. And me, being a goof, had wandered along and was trying to make people laugh and do a charity I was working on. And I told the guy next to her that, hey, you should give a lollipop to the beautiful girl you're standing next to. And he got really embarrassed and he held out this lollipop to her. And she took it. And apparently I turned to her parents and said, you know, it's your daughter's first day away from home and she's taking candy from a stranger. Nice work. And she said the laughter that followed just gave her one more day. She said, you know what, I'll quit tomorrow, but people are laughing now. That's a different feel. And eventually the next day, someone else created a lollipop moment. It wasn't about the lollipop. It was about this interaction. And she put it off again. And eventually she forgot about it. She came up to me to tell me as she heard I was leaving that she was graduating 4 years later and that she had been dating the guy since that morning and then invited me to their wedding a year and a half later. And the key for me is I don't remember the moment. And yet here was this woman coming up and saying, who I didn't even know, letting me know that maybe the biggest moment of leadership in my life, or at least the biggest impact I'd ever had on another human being in this moment that I didn't remember. I think that's it. I had no idea that I had done it. And yet this was clearly a massive impact that an action I had taken had had. And I talk about lollipop moments for being these individual moments of interpersonal interaction. And I guess the point is I'm trying to remind people that the biggest legacy you'll leave behind on this world, the biggest impact you're probably going to have on people you care about, good and bad, will probably have nothing to do with your goals. It's almost always going to be a result of the unplanned consequences of your everyday actions. And when we start to realize that our everyday interactions will undoubtedly have a much bigger legacy on most of the people with whom we interact than any title we earn, why we're paying so much more attention to the titles and the money and the accolades compared to what we leave in our wake. Because let's face it, that woman came up to me 4 years later and said, this was such a good thing you did. But inevitably, when you hear that, you can't help but think of all of the times that you did the opposite. Like, who are those people out there who you've never met, who you said something flippantly to, that you dismissed, that you were angry? In my case, I was drunk. I'm also, I was undiagnosed bipolar for a long time in my life. And then when I found out, I hid that as well. What did the process of hiding that, and often using words like, oh, crazy, or because I felt that's who I was. And of course, you deflect it by attacking what you're afraid of in yourself. When did I hurt other people who were struggling like I was by hiding who I was? Because honestly, everybody out there, we get taught that if you want to be impressive, you got to make people look at you and say, oh, wow, I can't do that. Isn't that amazing? For what it's worth, like, the biggest impact we have is when other people can look at us and say, oh my God, I thought I was the only one. Like, you're doing an entire podcast where you were saying to people, you were not the only one. You were not the only one who wanted to quit. You were not the only one who feels like they're worthless. You were not the only one who life screwed up on you and now makes you wonder if it's your fault. That's what you're doing. And that is what's so incredible leadership about this podcast, and to everyone listening, is that when you give people the opportunity to say, I thought I was the only one, I thought I was the only one hurt by that or hiding that or who needed that, that's leadership. And yes, I hope that you get whatever titles you're looking for, but give people the freedom to not be afraid to be around you, to be able to look at you and say, I feel like I have to put less energy into hiding when they're around you. Every great leader, the people around them feel like they can be themselves around them. And that's what a lollipop moment is a recognition that the biggest impact you're going to have on other people is probably the stuff that you don't give enough attention to. And I think that's crucial. And you said short 3 times, and I didn't do it for you.
Well, I wanted to just have you go on, so I inverse relationship to, tricking you to go longer. But the simple concept that you just shared at the end, I hope our listeners really picked up on it. You talk about those small things that, and using this specific story, it's something that you didn't remember. And for me, I was smiling during probably most of your response there, because it was the realization for me that it's not about you. And when you turn that focus away from you and on those people, and knowing your story as I do, you were being goofy and trying to be funny. And yes, you were, being silly to that girl's parents, but you were doing it because you wanted people to have a good day, have a good moment. You weren't saying at any point, okay, I'm going to say something unbelievably impactful, so in 4 years from now, she comes up to me, then I get invited to a wedding and I write a book and I do a TED Talk. No, you were doing something that you've probably done a bunch of times. And I just want to portray that to our listeners. It's about doing the right thing for the right reasons for other people as opposed to you. And I'm curious to get your perspective. It's something I speak on a lot is I don't know anybody that has done something 100% for somebody else with zero expectations in return, that ultimately they feel so much better themselves when you do something for somebody else.
Yeah, I think I just started to realize that so rarely do you recognize the most significant moments in your life as they're happening. And I also think we don't realize how significantly a moment we're creating in someone else's life as we're creating it, good and bad. The power that our words have, that our actions have, are just so much. We pay attention to so little of our actual impact, good and bad. And we let other people pay so little attention to their impact that I just started to realize that it can almost be overwhelming to think that we're that powerful. I guess, and I say that in my talk, and I guess I haven't said it a lot when I repeat it in the future, but it can be really frightening to think that you can matter that much when you're not paying attention. And I think that you got two options then: ignore it and just hope that you don't do damage, or what I've tried to do with the idea of the lollipop moment, which is to say, here's a story of something very impactful that I did, and I did it by accident. Why don't we all talk about how we can do it consciously? All right. Random acts of kindness sounds great. Awesome. I want to talk about conscious acts of kindness and empowerment. And for me, it's not even about kindness, and it's not small things. I like saying simple, not small. For me, it's about impact. And it doesn't have to be kind, but it has to be impactful. And if the intention is for it to be positive impact, it usually is kind. But it's not about being nice. It's about being useful. It's about being empowering. It's about trying to be better by making others better. And you say, what's the biggest challenge I'm facing now? Like the not give up, is that we're all so mad right now. And I don't mean for anything, but I apologize for being really honest today, but one of the things I'm most tired of right now is just, it seems like I'm always mad and I want to be a good person. And whether it's, we all fight over the pandemic, we all fight over politics, we all fight over, whether or not they should have left that pitcher in, or if the Nationals can't hold a 4-1 lead. Come on, Nationals, you could have helped my Jays out there. It just seems like there's just a low-grade anger at all times. And I think that makes us less likely to want to do good things, because we just seem like we're blaming the world for making us mad. And we don't do good stuff when we're mad. And I think that we have to be aware of that, and we have to be compassionate, and we have to remind ourselves that your leadership isn't determined by whether or not you're thinking good things. Your leadership is determined by whether or not you behave in positive ways. And there's almost like this, I heard a great phrase, toxic positivity. And people think of me as a motivational speaker, and I've always pushed back, because I think that when you would say you're a motivational speaker, you embrace this idea that you're always going to be positive. And that's like carrying around like a giant 10,000 pound weight on your shoulders. This idea that you're supposed to be motivating and inspiring all the time. It's like crushing. And so for me, it's like, I don't know if I'm a good person, but I want to do good things. And I hope that resonates with people out there, because I think that we start to believe that if you don't feel sunshine, lollipops, and rainbows, that's a character flaw, that you're supposed to find a way to go through this world always being positive. And I don't think that's the case. I think what we need to do is go through this world empowering ourselves to be the type of person who can recognize our darkest instincts and decide not to act on them. And I think that becomes easier when we forgive ourselves for having them. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know if that resonated with you at all, but this idea that like, I'm mad, so I'm bad. No, but if you're mad and you act out on it, then you're bad.
that concept of toxic positivity, not only did it resonate, but it hit me very, very strong, because I just did a speaking event in Ohio, and we were just talking about that, and we were working with a school, and there were a couple articles that circulated about toxic positivity. And I think, to your point, how I expressed it is, life is not about, and I think the words I actually used was rainbows and unicorns all the time, but it's during those challenging moments, addressing them, acknowledging them, but still moving forward with the most positive approach towards, how am I going to get through this? How am I going to get over this? We just lost, a terrible game. How do we move forward? And I think that, to me, is why I love what I do, because going through life where everything is sunshine and rainbows, no matter what, when it's not, going back to your point, dealing with what you did with Anastasia and other challenges that we've all had during these last 2 years, I think that toxic positivity is, oh, everything's great and everything happens for a reason and it's wonderful. No, this was very difficult. I don't know how I'm going to get through this today, tomorrow, next week. But to use your point, I need to get through today before I can worry about next week or the next year's playoffs. And I think that, for me, is so powerful, because that's what real life is. And that's what I love about what you do, and is what we try to do with our company, is embracing life's challenges, struggles, but also opportunities, and say, okay, how do I move forward with the most positive mindset dealing with this? And I think the flip side is, we also have some amazing days where things are going really well. I love that. I got to change lanes for a second, because I want to make sure I ask this question, because I'm actually intrigued with how you're going to answer, and I'm not sure how you are, so no pressure or anything. But I know the quote by Jim Rohn: "You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with." If I could grant you dinner with any 5 people, dead or alive, and you could level up with them, who would you pick?
And I've thought about this before. Honestly, I wish, I know this is not going to be the most inspiring. Honestly, man, I'd just have dinner with her and I'd leave the other 4 seats empty. Especially if I knew it was the only dinner I got to have, because then you get to say all the stuff that in the aftermath you realize you didn't.
That is in no way, shape, or form is that not real and true, or not motivational, because the question, which is why I love it, is there are no right or wrong answers. It's super personal. I appreciate that. Wanted to ask you to share with our listeners, what's the best way for them to follow you and also find out more about you? And then anything relating to the book, I assume they can get it wherever books are sold.
They do, at fine bookstores everywhere, and quite a few sketchy ones. You can reach me at drewdudley.com, DREWDUDLEY.com. That's got all, like, anything you want to find, you can find there at the website. And on most social media, it's at Day1Drew, DAYONEDREW.
I love that. And last question I have for you is the same question I ask everybody: is if you have any parting words you'd like to leave with our listeners today.
Yeah, you have gotten through every challenge you have ever faced because you are still here. And I don't think we've given ourselves enough credit for that. We might have scars from it. You might not be happy with how you got through it, but every single problem you have ever faced, you have gotten through because you're still here. And one guy wrote something for me once, and I repeat it to everyone, which is, there is power in your pain and there is wisdom in your wounds. And there's just something about the fact that whenever we face something new, we seem to automatically forget the battles that we fought and won. And so we sometimes ignore the worst parts of our lives because they make us feel like we were hurt or we screwed up. But I try to remember that morning we lost her every time I face something hard, not to punish myself, because it always is this reminder of, like, hey, you did this. And so I think I just want to let everyone know that I know we get down on ourselves, and when we have a negative thing happen, we then think, oh, like, this happened before, and like, this is just another thing. Give yourself credit for the battles that you have fought and you have won. And it's so awful, I think, we think about these moments in our lives that make us feel like we're less than we are. But realize that when you're thinking about these moments that make you feel like less, or that they took something from you, you are here right now thinking in the past, they are behind you. You were looking back on them. And sometimes I think we have to give ourselves credit for what we've gone through, because that's what gives us the strength to get through what's coming down the pipe. And for what it's worth, the last thing I will say this, and I don't know who needs to hear it, but when I did, it always comes back to me. For people, for jobs, for games, grief is just love coming face to face with its oldest enemy. And for some reason, that quote applies to so many more parts of my life than I anticipated. So if anybody out there that resonates with you in whatever context, grief is just love coming face to face with its oldest enemy. And for some reason, I just share that anytime someone says you want to put one thing out there for our audience. And I don't know if maybe it resonates with someone.
You know, I asked for any parting words, and you left like 5 or 6 absolute mic drop moments. So, Drew, I truly appreciate you. For our listeners, I would highly recommend getting a copy of Drew's book. But I have to say, you shared vulnerably, openly, and I think that what you just shared during these last 35 minutes will definitely resonate with a bunch of our listeners. And I can't thank you enough. And I hope that you and I can connect again soon.
I'd absolutely love that. Thanks for what you do. And everybody out there, share what you're going through. Somebody else is doing it quietly. You're the reason they won't anymore.
Thank you for listening to episode number 351. I'm sure you appreciated much of what Drew shared with us today. To wrap up today's episode, I challenge each and every one of you to take 1 or 2 of the ideas that Drew shared with us that resonated with you and begin now, today. Today is your day one, and make sure you go crush it. And remember, we rise by lifting others up. And lastly, to our listeners, thank you. We truly appreciate your time, and we hope our episodes inspire you to keep on attacking life and never giving up. To quote Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, it's always too early to quit.